Hey guys, I wanted to welcome you here to Catholic Shopping Bag. We're excited to have you here with us today. And today I'm Jen Frost, and I'm going to be showing you guys for our workshop Wednesday how we're going to foundation paper piece. So I've been working on a quilt pattern these past few weeks. It is going to be our Jesse Tree Quilt, and I'm really excited for it. We have a bunch of quilters joining us. We have a bunch of new quilters, a bunch of folks who've never done this before. We've got a lot of experienced quilters joining us, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Together we're making 25 blocks. I'll post a link to it here when we're done, and they're going to be walking us through our salvation story all the way from creation all the way through Christ's birth. So it's a really special quilt we're making. And as we make this quilt, we're using a special technique called foundation paper piecing. And foundation paper piecing is a really neat technique because it lets you make very, very exact shapes. I'm going to turn my camera here for a sec. You need to ignore my messy table. But if you look over my shoulder, you can see over there in the corner on the wall behind the big box, which has all of our towels in there. We're so excited to get those liturgical towels out. Those are all the different blocks we've made so far. And you'll see there's some very exact piecing, so you can make specific shapes like earth. You can do the apples, you can do towers. So that's actually what we're going to be working on today. We're going to be making the Tower of Babel together. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And I want to just share with you today some basic techniques that I really find that are helpful when you're paper piecing. So let's get started. So the first thing first, when you are quilting, when you are foundation paper piecing, again, foundation paper piecing means sewing directly on paper to make shapes. Here's an example. We'll talk more about this in a minute, but you'll see this is how you cut these shapes out and you actually sew directly on the paper itself to make shapes. The very first thing you're going to want to do is actually just get your machine ready. This is a whole different kind of quilting. So here's some tips for setting up your machine. The first tip I have is you're going to want to use your quilting foot that has the little bit of clear space in it. Now this is a personal recommendation. I think this will make things a lot easier for you. You're going to use the clear foot because this way, as the paper is coming through, you're going to be able to see where the paper is and line it up with this quilting foot a lot easier than you can with like a traditional 1/4 inch foot. So I'm going to put my foot back on my machine here. That's tip number 1. Your second tip, you're going to set your machine to sew in the center. Now, normally when you're quilting, or probably a lot of other kinds of sewing too, you sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and that's not what you want to do here. So we're going to sew with a center seam. So pop my center seam on, and then I'm going to adjust my stitch length. You want your stitch length to be 1 millimeter. And the reason you do that is you think about when you sew on paper. Let's go back to our little example here. When you're sewing directly on paper, when you're done, you need to remove this paper. So as you're tearing the paper off, you're going to want to have very small stitches because those small stitches are going to perforate your paper and it's going to rip off a lot easier than it would if you had wide stitches, okay? So we're going to make sure our machine is all set and we're going to go ahead and get started. Okay, second tip again, now we're still not sewing, right? We've got our correct walking foot on, we've got our correct sewing foot on there. We've got our machine set to center stitch, we've got it set to a 1 millimeter length. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to cut out all of our pieces. So when you print out a foundation paper piecing quilt plan, you're going to end up with a lot of papers. So the majority of papers, usually when you're printing out one of these, will print all on one piece of paper. So you're going to cut all of them out. Now, as you know, a standard piece of paper is like 11 by 8.5. And some foundation pieces are just bigger than that. So you may have to do this with them. You'll see here, this has been taped together, okay? So if you look close, I'll bring this up to the camera, you'll see there's a dotted line right in the middle, and there's a dotted line on the page behind it. So when you cut these out, what you're gonna do is you'll actually just line them up, and you'll tape right over the center there. Try to keep your tape away from the edges because that's where you're gonna sew, and you don't wanna gum up your needle. I definitely recommend using wall-safe tape because wall-safe tape is just sticky enough. It's not going to be so sticky that it's going to gum up your machine too much. Again, you always want to try to avoid sewing on the tape, but it's like a good happy medium as opposed to like, say, I don't know, like a heavy duty packing tape. That would be a real tough one to use. Okay. So we've got our pieces all cut out. My next recommendation is to always follow the directions. So In saying that, you'll see often quilt pattern directions for quilts like this will say, sew piece A, sew piece B, attach A to B, sew piece C, attach AB to C. I would always follow those. I've seen some people where they'll just be like, I'm just going to make all my pieces first, and they make all these pieces first and then they assemble them. The problem there is you can end up losing a piece. It's a lot easier just to print out a piece of paper than it is to make a whole piece and lose it and sew it, or sew it and then lose it. You can also end up mixing up your colors, or you may end up deciding that halfway through you're going to switch up some of your colors because you don't like the way they're laying out. And if you just follow the directions in the order they're put in there, it's a lot easier for you to be able to see what's going on and be able to take some of those away. So, okay, so we're going to look at that. So today we're going to just sew one piece with you today. I don't want you to have to sit through the whole block. That would take us about an hour. So I'm going to take you through sewing piece K. This is on Solomon's Temple. So I'll show you when we're done what we have done on Solomon's Temple so far. And I started some pre-work on it so you don't have to sit through the whole thing. And we'll show you where this piece attaches, okay? So the first thing we're going to do is, like I said, we have our piece cut out and we're going to grab our fabrics. So you're always going to start, obviously, with whatever letter is number 1. So here you see is K1. We're going to start. So on this example, your K1 is light blue. So that's going to be some of our sky on our temple, okay? So I'm going to grab my light blue. And the first piece is always the easiest because you can just make sure that you're covering the white edge and then about 1/4 of an inch all the way around that piece. So I'm going to put my piece down here. I've got my scissors. Fold those edges so you can see them a little bit more clearly. You're going to trim that up. Trim this edge up. And then I've got a little blue piece. And you'll see the blue piece is definitely a little bit bigger. I had a nice little corner that I was able to use up for that piece. What's nice about paper piecing, and we're going to show you, I'll show you a technique here in a second, is you can actually do this with like hardly any waste. That's one of the common complaints I get from some customers is like, oh, I don't like paper piecing because there's so much waste. I'm going to show you a way that we can avoid a lot of that waste. Okay, so I've got my blue. Here's my blue sky, and now I'm going to sew on part of my castle. I don't think these were those ridges on a castle. I can never remember what those are called. Kind of like the defense where like the arrow men would hide behind when everyone else was shooting arrows at them. So I'm going to put my blue. First piece is always the trickiest. So I've got my blue fabric, right? Holding it up against my gray fabric. And then this is my seam that I'm going to sew right here. And you can see that I've got about 1/4 of an inch just above that, okay? So I'm going to bring that over here to my machine. You do not have to back stitch or anything. This is just you're quickly putting some stitches down. Again, using that clear foot with the center stitch at 1 millimeter. It's so easy. And I'm really excited to show you this one because this is another thing another strong recommendation I like to make to everybody. Okay, so you'll see there's the white edge. This is your allowance right here. You're going to sew from, God bless you, we got schoolwork going on here. You're going to sew right from the corner all the way over through that allowance, and that'll secure your stitch in place, okay? So then you can open that up, and you'll see now here, you're going to fold that over, and you've got a piece coming down, and this is where you're starting to make your shape on the front, okay? So I'm going to take my scissors here, and I'm going to trim this up a little bit. And now I'm going to fold this down. I'm going to trim about 1/4 of an inch there. Some people measure exactly. I'm not very exact. It's kind of like a recipe when it says, a teaspoon of salt or a teaspoon of cinnamon, and you're like, yeah, that's close enough. That's kind of how I do this. Close enough. Okay, so I've got my 1/4 inch. Now I'm going to add one more on this side to make this piece on the castle. Temple, not castle, temple. I'll fold that edge down. Again, so I know I need 1/4 of an inch, so I'm going to roughly go there. There's my 1/4 inch on both sides, okay? Pop my stitch in real quick here. And I'm going to fold that one up, over, and trim it. Okay, here's what we've got now. Okay, so So you can see here is the base of the castle. So you can see there's a little bit of sky. And here are the two little pieces of the castle that the archers would hide behind. Okay, so now we're gonna work on our large blue sky. This is a really nice technique I'm gonna show you here so you can minimize your waste. So I'm just gonna fold it over. And again, trim up so it's roughly 1/4 of an inch. And this is where the no waste paper piecing comes in. So again, a common question is, I don't like paper piecing because I feel like I waste so much. So an easy way to see exactly how much space you need to cover that on the back side, which would be what's really gonna end up being the right side. If you take your paper and you fold it over, this is gonna be your top seam. So I'm gonna put my top seam, for example, right here, okay? Just as an example. Because say I wanna use up, on my fabric, I wanna use up this piece. If I put it here, you can see that when I fold the white down, it doesn't actually cover it. So I know that that's not exactly where I want it to go. So instead, I'm gonna take this little piece and we'll find a nice flat spot for it. Let's stay over here. Instead, I'm gonna go right here. So you see, I'm gonna wedge it in the corner and I'm hardly wasting. There's like just a touch of space that's gonna get cut off, but I know it's gonna fit because if you can fold it forward, then once you open it up and it gets folded back, you'll know that it's a nice clean fit. Okay, so we'll sew this piece right here. So we're gonna open this back up, keep it nice and tight. Sometimes you can pin this. Pins are always gonna be your best friend when it comes to sewing. Second best friend. I guess your machine technically is your first. So we'll put that stitch in there real quick. Cut that off, and then you'll see now when I open it back up, it very cleanly folds right back on the other side, right where we saw it folded on the front. So that's a really nice technique that you can use to make sure you're not wasting fabric. It took me a while to fully grasp how the front fold is exactly the same as your back fold. Because I admit I was one of those wasters in the beginning. I was just kind of using a little bit more fabric than I probably needed to. So you'll see now when I trim this up, there's my waste. So you're not really wasting anything, which is great. Okay, so you can see there's the top of your Solomon's Tower, Solomon's Temple, with some of the sky. So I'm going to put this one aside for now because again, I don't want you to have to sit through making the whole castle. But I'm going to show you what I got done this morning before I jumped on here with you guys. This is the center of Solomon's Temple. You'll see here's the two doors, here's the pillars holding it up, a little window, and here's the top of those where those little archers go, okay? And here's the other one side that I made. You'll see this is actually the piece that we worked on just a few minutes ago. That's gonna go on this side. So for now, I'm gonna show you how can we attach one full piece that's been sewn to another full piece to get those nice, clean, exact corners because we wanna make things line up, okay? So this is another fun technique you can use. You're gonna grab 2 pins. I think I lost one of my pins. Oh, here it is. Don't lose pins. So first thing you're gonna do is on one side of your paper, you're gonna see your corners, right? So you got a corner here and you've got a corner right here. So you're gonna take your pin and you're gonna pop it through both corners, okay? You can tell as I get older, I have to sit like further back to see where my pins go. Okay, so I've got a pin through each corner there. All right, you can see there's this corner and here's this corner. You're gonna take your other piece that you're lining it up against, okay? So now you'll see the same piece. This has a corner here and a corner right here. You're gonna take that pin and you're gonna slide it through. I like a window right over here for some great light. And so you're gonna pop it through. I can kind of see where that corner is. So you'll see now I'm coming right through this corner over here. And I'm gonna move this end over and I'm gonna come right through this corner over here too. Okay. Just missed that one a little bit. There we go. Okay, so now I've got corners coming right through there on the front and corners coming right through on the back. So as these are nice and lined up, you can kind of give it a little tug, not too hard, just a little tug. And what that's gonna do is that's gonna line this line on the back perfectly even with the line on the front, okay? And then you can sew that down. So as I sew, you're gonna take obviously that first pin out, you're gonna try to keep those papers lined up just as they were. Again, you can stick another pin in there across the middle to hold it in place. I'm going to stitch that down. Holding on that second pin to keep the paper down, keep those corners lined up. And there you go. So you'll see now you've got your line going right across the front. And if you flip it over, it goes almost exactly perfect right across the back line too. So that's another nice technique. So then from there, you pop it open. Got a lot of threads to clean up when you're done, but you can see now you're slowly building your castle. And then here is the other side of the temple that we made together earlier this morning. So that'll go over here once I make this little piece. Okay. So there's some really cool little techniques for you guys to practice and work on as you're doing your foundation paper piecing. Again, this is my favorite way of quilting. The paper ripping off isn't always the most fun, but you know, you can make just some super fun, super unique shapes when you quilt this way, as opposed to just traditional piecing, you know, where you cut squares and half square triangles. Love doing that too. But to me, for more art style quilts, I just really like this technique. So I hope this was helpful for you guys. It's wonderful to welcome you to my messy little workshop today. And thank you for joining me. We'll talk to you soon.